Broadcasting from Autism One, this is From the Children's Corner, Research, Reform, and Recoveries. I'm your host, Stan Kurtz, and thanks for joining me. One of the symptoms of my son's biological autism was fungus. It was visible on his tongue and on his organic acid test. And like a majority of parents with affected kids, I focused on killing it off. But I may have gotten lucky by using other therapies that might mobilize fungal toxins stuck in the fat. Most of us don't realize that fungus produce toxins that could potentially be lethal, like gliotoxins, and other toxins that can affect neurological behavior even in minute amounts. Eddie is a man who is suffering from severe intestinal fungal problems, as well as energy, anxiety, and self-image problems. After trying methylcobalamin nasal spray, Eddie appeared to have a short LSD type of response, and then he recovered from all of his chronic symptoms. Did methylcobalamin activate certain receptors like D4 or turn off methionine synthase and ultimately cause a new awareness so significant that Eddie hallucinated? Or did methylcobalamin mobilize fungal psychotropic toxins from fatty stores? Or is there something else going on here? To start, let me highlight some of the ergo-LSD symptoms that may sound a little like ASD. Vasoconstriction and reduced blood flow, irrational fear or irrational happiness, hypersensitive smell or taste, sensory processing issues like how we see, hear, and smell. All that said, let's explore fungus and toxins, LSD, autism, and Eddie's first experience with methylcobalamin.
Well, last night tried the methyl B12 nasal spray. I don't know, I just got happy. And everybody said I had the smileys. They said that my cheekbones were up. We were at a long table having dinner, and people coming in and out of the restaurant on this side, and what people were doing on the end of the table on that side were distracting me. I don't know if the colors were getting brighter. Everything looked different, like color +5. Like somebody turned it up on the TV set.
As Eddie was experiencing his altered state, Dr. David Quigg, the Vice President of Research for Doctors Data Laboratories, happened to walk by.
In general, a very relaxed, happy individual, smiling most of the time, kind of a whole face smile, eyes a little bit squinted, much like a person who was on drugs.
I noticed the candle looked different, brought it over and was looking at this candle. And the colors on it, it was real pretty. You had the clear yellow, blue on top, but it didn't look like a normal flame. It looked like a little piece of glass that was moving. I think somebody took the candle away from me. I'm not sure. I wasn't going to touch it, but the lights around the bar as well. They had these 3 different colored lights, and I can't remember. I think they were blue, green, and yellow. And a fluorescent tube underneath it. And it had this great effect that they rigged up, that the light would pulse and move through like in little waves. Like if you watch an old jukebox where they've got the bubbled water moving through the tube around it. It seemed like that. And I told him that I was watching that thing move along, and Stan told me, that's not doing that. It's completely still and solid. And I thought there was a chance that he might be putting me on, but I knew that he was trying to document this, so I knew that he was probably telling me the truth. And then he got others to say, no, it's not doing that.
When he was asked to describe what he saw, and that was, at the time it was the lights around the top of the lounge there, what struck me was that his speaking was very, very vivid, slow and deliberate, and a very stepwise organized description of the pattern of the lights, very, very carefully choosing words. He wasn't babbling or slurring or anything like that. And then he elaborated into what seemed to be a visual hallucination that I felt was very sincere and, in fact, very consistent description when he was questioned about it. And he was extremely clear about what he saw.
Had been drinking a Mr. Pibb, got down to the bottom, and I was drinking from the melting ice as it was going. Not a problem, did this all the time. And I went to go take a taste of it. It tasted strange. I can't describe what it tasted like. Then I took a drink of water, and that tasted different as well. It tasted like I said rusty. It was kind of like between rust and if somebody had like I was drinking out of an ashtray or something. It just tasted strange. It was not pleasant at all. I think I've been drunk 5 times in my life, and usually it's 2 or 3 years between each event. The last time I had anything to drink was in early or late 2002, early 2003. Been a long time. As far as any other kind of drug, never.
In us interviewing him and finding out that he hadn't done any drugs in his past, and I think he had maybe had alcohol 4 or 5 times in his life, how surprised were you at his condition?
Very surprised. That's the kind of thing that many years ago people in college would have described as a freebie, a flashback sort of thing. So I was quite surprised that, he hadn't done that in the distant past or even in the near past.
What drugs do you think could cause that type of effect?
More likely LSD. Definitely LSD. I'd say more so LSD than something like mushrooms, which tends to be very subtle, or even like peyote cactus, which is also a bit more subtle. LSD seems to take over a lot more strongly.
If I was to say to you, I gave someone methyl B12 and they had an LSD type of response, and you didn't see it for yourself, would you have believed it?
No.
That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can think of as far as a vitamin like methyl B12 all by itself that could produce this?
Not even close. I mean, not even if I stretched my imagination and knowing some of the things about dopamine and dopamine receptors. I mean, even if they were completely shut down and methylation turned it back on, there's no way you would expect that kind of response.
Then people were doing the in my face. I think they were testing me, and it was like they were taking a punch at me, but their fist was getting bigger at the time, and it just was startling. It was just a little too much. It was intense. It was a hand coming to me, but it just seemed like it was coming at me really fast and getting large, and it just wasn't very pleasant.
When you start to research altered states and fungus, it's hard not to run into stories about the entire community that was affected by wheat fungus in France. And then, of course, the legendary Salem witch trials of 1692. Dr. Richard Deeth, a molecular pharmacologist at Northeastern University, explains.
The sort of historical background that might connect the Salem witch trials and the psychosis that affected the town of Salem, Massachusetts, and led to the trials of witches, and in fact, eventually to burning them at the stake, for example. And the possibility was probed by a researcher, somebody that I knew, named Charles Ellis. What he found evidence for was in the area around Salem, the particular kind of grasses that were growing there, that were harvested in some cases as a source of grain, were typically contaminated with a particular fungus. These were the rye grasses, and it was called a rye smut. It particularly grows when the wheat, in this case rye, is stored. And if it's stored in a damp place and something grows on it, then in fact this fungus, particular one, Claviceps purpurea is the Latin name for it, tends to grow on that rye wheat. And the fungus turns out to be a real treasure trove of pharmacologically active molecules. And together they're called ergot alkaloids. And the most famous one, perhaps, is the ergotamine, or ergot alkaloid derivative ergotamine. But there's another one, ergonovine or ergonovine, that's still widely used today in clinical medicine. The compounds, the ergot alkaloids, are also the source of LSD. That is, LSD can come from different plants and mushrooms and stuff like that, but in this case, the particular fungus we're talking about does produce the ergot alkaloids that have lysergic acid structure to it, LSD, and so it was a candidate, therefore, for causing psychomimetic or psychotic reactions, and the mixed alkaloids from the raw material can do that. So this particular sort of pharmaceutical historian, Charles Ellis, put these together and created a hypothesis. It's really as much a story as it is a historical fact, anyway. But otherwise, he suggested that perhaps what went on in the Salem town during this particular period was that the town's general supply of bread and other flour-based products was contaminated with this fungus, and that the psychomimetic compounds that it produced might have affected the township, not necessarily just the witches, but perhaps the actual people that were accusing them of being witches, and it sort of wasn't clear which side we want to assign psychotic behavior to here.
If you look closely at the history of wheats and grains, you'll find a wide variety of challenges in treating fungus and common spraying of chemicals consistent with prescription drugs, and also even methylmercury. With such difficulty in controlling fungus on these foods, one might wonder if we should have ever been eating them at all.
The other thing I didn't mention last night is the beard. That I just went up to feel the beard, and it felt like I'd been to the doctor's office or the dentist's office and had Novocaine or something, where your mouth feels numb. I remember saying that my beard felt numb, which was a strange thing to say because you can't feel your beard, but underneath it, it just was tingling. It's not happening right now, but it just felt weird last night.
If I was to say to you, what about the concept of kids with fungus that potentially have dumped enough fungal toxins and alkaloids into the fat, and that adding methylcobalamin actually helped methylate them into the bloodstream out of the fat, and potentially help to get them out of the body. Taking that theory into account after what you saw that night, what would your thoughts be?
I think it's a very plausible hypothesis, because what struck me the most was that in addition to his hallucination type things, there were two things that really struck me: that he was sort of off in his own world, much like an ASD child. One of those specific incidences, it was when, you may recall, I started speaking extremely slowly to him. And just to see, I was testing his auditory perception. And although you heard it and you were sitting, 3 feet away from him, we were all in a little triangle there, he didn't even hear it on my first attempt. And so it was as if, it was kind of like the white noise sort of thing, where I didn't get his attention. He was sort of zoned. The other thing was the way he overreacted to visual stimulation, his exaggerated perception of a non-threatening gesture, like moving your hand towards him, or when the, quote, devil showed up. His reaction suggested fear, or probably more like disruption of his world, the way he sees it. And that's what struck me so much as being so similar to the ASD picture, was that, they're in this little world, and this stuff, normal stuff, came in as extremely foreign and overstimulated.
And by the devil, the situation there was a friend of ours who turned his head a certain way, and because of his haircut and his ears a little bit, everything became so exaggerated that he happened to look like the devil to him. And he was
Right,
describing
and
it.
he even pointed to the fireplace and said, go back to your home, go home. That was wild.
Now, just chatting out loud for a moment, we certainly know that our kids are affected by fungus in a way that typical kids generally aren't. So there's a larger amount of kids with autism that have seemingly fungal issues when typical controls don't have as many. That seems to be a pretty fair observation. And we do know that certain funguses can create alkaloids, and that alkaloids can potentially, depending on the alkaloid, can have neurological effects. If we look at the kids with autism, I don't see kids that have been completely brain damaged per se by mercury directly. That's not how I look at these kids when I see them, because some of them seem extremely bright, and some of the kids that recover in leaps and bounds quite quickly, nonverbal to verbal, or verbal to suddenly self-aware in a very short period of time. This to me doesn't seem like brain damage that could be reversed that quickly, And so to me, I've always wondered what a mercury brain damaged child would really look like, and I don't know if that's always what some kids with autism look like. And to me they look like they're in a bit of an altered state on a drug of some sort. That's kind of how I see these kids. And one of the things that we also see is we see vasoconstriction in the kids as well. We see reduced blood flow in the brain. And when you're talking about these meds sort of being vasoconstrictive, and they are ergo-based, that's sort of an added little checkbox that just popped up into my head. And I wonder, and I don't know if what your view is of this, but I wonder if it is possible that one of the funguses that shows up that's in play with some of these kids may be dumping some alkaloids into the fat, and at some point hit a certain level where they're chronically affecting some type of altered state in these kids.
Yeah, it's a very interesting hypothesis, and it has all the elements to be a useful hypothesis, and all the elements to possibly be true, and it would need to be tested somehow, of course. And it reminds me of, if you boil it down, what you're really suggesting is that there might be some psychomimetic compounds that are floating around in autistic kids, produced in association with their illness, that lead to the mental problems that they have. And there's different forms of that. You're suggesting that the fungus, in fungal infection when it exists, could be the source of those. And of course, there's parallels, and it's in that general way the gluten and casein-free story, where the possibility that there are opiate compounds produced in autistic kids in particular under conditions perhaps of an inflamed gut, that those opiate peptides are altering their mental state and contributing. And there's also parallels in general the same way in schizophrenia. For many years that there were thought to be hallucinogens, and people would look at the urine samples in particular of people with schizophrenia, and I know it's been done with kids with autism as well, looking for unusual compounds. In the case of schizophrenia, they were looking for alkaloid-like compounds, and when it was recognized that alkaloids cause hallucinations. And in the case of schizophrenia, that hadn't really panned out to be a major source. With the fungal infections in autism, it's possible that that's a different setting. So I think it's an interesting and creative hypothesis, and Fungus has to be both tested and then balanced against other things that might be contributing as well.
Both Dr. Quigg and Dr. Deeth were supportive of the idea that fungal toxins mobilized by methylcobalamin might have been what caused Eddie's hallucinations, and that's my primary theory. But to be fair, after hearing more details of what happened that night, Dr. Deeth offered a second hypothesis.
Well, that's a very frightening description, actually, although at the same time it conveys, I suppose, the potential power of methyl B12, making the assumption, again, that was what was going on, which is reasonable. The power to alter, in this case, perception and cognitive function. I don't know what the limits are, but because we now know that the human brain has a need for methyl B12 that's really not parallel in other species, I'm not surprised at another level to say, well, okay, this is a very primary mechanism of cognitive function, and depending upon what state someone is in, let's say that the methyl B12 all of a sudden allowed this D4 dopamine receptor to start making associations or creating exchange of information and functional connectivity between parts of the brain that were otherwise not doing it before. How would somebody feel if they were confronted with that? And some of the things that you described, would, I suppose, be not too far off in terms of abnormal sensations, not being able to completely comprehend what was going on, but recognizing that there were some dramatic changes in someone's thought process, and you end up very close to a hallucination under those conditions. We're all used to things being a certain way, and if you just changed the set points in neural networks and things like that, we would all be taken aback by that.
So were Eddie's hallucinations caused by Theory 1, fungal toxins being mobilized by methylcobalamin from his fatty tissue, or Theory 2, a new activation of neurotransmitters and receptors and neuronet processing directly affected by methylcobalamin? Or was this something else altogether? To try to learn more about what happened the night before, Eddie tried another dose of methylcobalamin.
The windows are loud. There seems to be a lot going on out there. It's awful busy. I mean, I'm seeing at least 20 cars right now moving around. I mean, it's great. You sit there, like, you feel like I could just stare out the window and see new things. The tail of a plane from the airport across the way. Another one, all the cars passing by. Power lines everywhere. The air conditioner on the roof ahead, over here. But loud is the colors on the trees are nice. It's green. It's pleasant. Suddenly everything just seems, I'm sure everything's the same. It doesn't look like the tree is flame or anything like that. It's just, I'm paying more attention to it. I'm not just thumping along in my normal haze, it seems. I got a lot of energy right now. I feel like I've got a lot of energy. I came in, I think I said my energy was 7 or 8 or 8 or 9, but it's a 10 right now. If I liked running, I'd want to go running. Just feel like doing something. I have a lot of energy right now.
How's your anxiety level right now?
Don't have any. No anxiety. Not about anything. I feel fine about everything. Usually anxiety is my friend. It's always around. About either my self-image or financial things, about, what people think of me. Very insecure. Right now I feel fine. Mr. Hyde is dead. Dr. Jekyll's here. It's just a completely different person, it feels like.
Eddie experienced all the clarity and calmness commonly associated with responding to methylcobalamin spray, but without the hallucinations from the night before. Along with that was an improved self-image and general functioning. Whatever was previously chronically affecting him was seemingly gone, and reflecting back, he couldn't help but to relate his experience to kids on the spectrum.
If a young child who didn't know that a flame was not glass, or that the things coming at them weren't weapons. It would be a very scary world.
In summary, this is just one observation, and we have plenty more to learn. But if this theory turns out to be accurate, it may better explain some of the mechanisms behind effective treatments like methylcobalamin, niacin and L-carnitine, vitamin A, vitamin C, SAMe, folate, St. John's wort, antivirals like Valtrex and OLE, and used in conjunction with antifungals like diflucanonizerol, chelation, anti-LSD homeopathy, and hyperbaric oxygen. If you have comments about today's segment, please email them at skurtz@autism1.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next month. You've been listening to Talk from the Children's Corner. We broadcast every second Monday at 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Thanks for joining us.